Good morning, fabulous students. I hope everyone is safe and well. We're going to be doing our notes through a screencast today and try to get us back to normal as much as we can. Today we're going to be talking about something called Ancien regime. It's the first lesson in a unit on the French Revolution. So when we look at these words on screen, I know it looks like a typo. Ancien looks like there should be a T there or something, right? But this term simply refers to the old order of France. This is French. So when we look at ancien, it means old, and regime simply means order. It means like a government system. Usually it's like a government that we don't like. So you'll never hear anyone say the Trudeau regime in Canada. No, that's something we use to refer to a dictatorship or a government we don't like. So when we talk about the ancien regime, it's the old order. It's the old dictatorship under the French king. This is before the French Revolution of 1789. So, France was the center of enlightened philosophy, but circumstances in France were far from enlightened. This contrast would bring France to the point of a revolution. So, enlightened philosophy, you've had a lot of that over the last couple of days. Guys like Locke, Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, well, the last three of those, they were all French. So, look, France, not the only place where there's enlightened thinkers, but it is the hotbed of the Enlightenment. All right, and some of these enlightened thinkers pointed out some real differences between what is ideal and what is. The contrast between the idealism of the Enlightenment would bring France to the point of a revolution in 1789. So you get guys like Voltaire talking about free speech, and you get guys like Montesquieu, separation of powers. There's none of that in France. It's run by a king. You get guys like Rousseau talking about the social contract. There's none of that in France in 1789. And so this contrast between what French thinkers thought should be and what was in France, that contrast is going to bring France to the point of a revolution, but there's a lot more factors to look at. So the first thing we need to understand is the structure of French society in 1789. French society was broken into three classes or estates, and it's not us classifying them this way. This is the French way of classifying people. And so there were three estates. The first estate was the clergy, the second estate was the nobles, and the third estate was everybody else. So, the first estate, clergy. About 1% of the population. They enjoyed a lot of special privileges, they didn't pay any taxes, and they enjoyed land ownership. It's a pretty sweet gig to be in the first estate. Now, France isn't unique in this. The clergy enjoys a pretty sweet deal in a lot of countries in Europe. In my own travels, I can tell you, you go to certain places, and I'll tell you what, usually there's a palace where the princes and the kings lived, and then there's another palace where the bishop or the cardinal lived. So clergy simply refers to people who work in the business of religion. We don't really use the word a lot today, but the word clergy could be anybody it could be a priest, it could be a nun, it could be a monk, it could be a bishop, it could be a cardinal. So these people enjoyed some really nice special privileges, land ownership, tax exemptions among them. And again, these people could live pretty well and never have to really get their hands dirty doing the hardest sorts of work. The second estate was the nobles. Nobles are people like, for instance, we read from the Duc de Saint-Simon, or anybody else of noble titles. So this could be a duke, this could be a baron, this could be a count. All of these people that have these noble titles, they really considered themselves to be a separate bloodline from the common people. They considered ordinary people to be the common rabble. Well, it wasn't just themselves who considered it. It was the law of France that the second estate owned land, and they got the best royal jobs, and they also got plenty of tax breaks. They paid almost nothing in taxes, and as well as getting a lot of special privileges. We'll get to some of those privileges a little bit later. But the big thing to understand here, Louis XIV, remember, early in his reign, there's that uprising, that rebellion of nobles, the Fronde. And how does Louis keep the nobles in line after this? Well, he just keeps them happy. One thing he does is he gives them the best jobs. So all the jobs running the government, all the jobs for admirals and generals and bridge builders, if you had an important job overseeing something, you had to be a noble. And you usually got paid pretty well for these jobs. And a lot of these jobs were nonsense jobs. Like there was one job that was a bed rising ceremony called the levee. And there would be nobles who would help the king literally get out of bed in the morning and get dressed. That was a job. Um, Pretty sweet gig if that's all the work you got to do for the day, and you get a pretty nice salary out of it. Finally, they get tax breaks. They pay next to nothing in taxes. Well, that keeps the nobles real happy, and it ensures there will never be an uprising of nobles again. That's the system that Louis XIV puts in place. That's the system that his grandson, Louis XV, and his kid, Louis XVI, they all keep this same system in place of the nobles paying nothing in taxes. Again, the nobles could often have their own private little armies. The nobles could theoretically potentially rise up and start another rebellion. So the king tried very hard to keep the nobles happy. Well, 98% of the population is in what we call the third estate. It's bankers, it's doctors, it's lawyers, farmers, servants. This could be anybody that's not a noble or not a clergyman. So unless you work for the church or you were a noble, unless you were in the first estate or second estate, you're in the third estate. Well, 90% of the third estate is going to be rural peasants, people who generally don't read or write, who generally work real hard with their hands and with their back. But that other 10% could be bankers, doctors, lawyers. Look, bankers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, these people read. And they read the writings of people like Montesquieu. They read the writings of people like Voltaire. So there's going to be what we could call a dangerous 10% of the third estate that are city dwellers. That dangerous third estate is going to play dangerous 10% is going to play a critical role in the French Revolution. The French Revolution is going to be all about the third estate rising up to overthrow the Ancien regime. And at the tippity top of the Ancien regime is the king. But don't make no mistake, the revolution is also against the second estate, and it's also against the first estate. So the revolution, they're just as mad at the church as they are at the nobles as they are at the king. This 90% of rural peasants, they're going to follow the lead of that 10% of people that live in the towns and the cities, the people that are bankers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, newspaper editors, and other educated people. There's going to be a dangerous 10% that's going to set the whole thing in motion. The third estate had to pick up all the slack with taxes that the first and second estate didn't pay. So, first and second estate didn't pay taxes. That just meant the third estate had to pay more. But they weren't in much position to resist. At least they didn't think they were. They also owed fees for all sorts of things, and services like the corvée, which was unpaid labor on roads and bridges. Imagine you've paid your taxes, and once a month you got to go out and you got to fill potholes, or you got to pave new roads, or do a dangerous job working on a bridge. Finally, there's forbiddance on hunting wild game. That means that you cannot hunt for food, even if you're hungry, even if you're desperate. Okay, so if you're a peasant, hunting is off limits. It's one of the reasons why when the French settle into the United States and into Canada, the first business they get into is fur trapping. It's because, well, you're not allowed to do that in France. So if you want furs, you're probably going to have to get it from the Americas. Just a little tie-in with our own history here. Hunting was forbidden for common people because it was seen as a sort of noble pursuit, noble game. And the nobles, the king, they didn't want the common rabble, these ordinary people, these lesser people. They didn't want them hunting because that would deplete the forests of wild game for the king to hunt and the nobles to hunt. Not that the nobles are particularly hungry, they just like doing it for sport. And so it was forbidden to everyone to hunt. And the restrictions were so strict that you couldn't even kill crop-destroying animals. So if you're growing cabbages, let's say, and you got some rabbits coming in that are constantly destroying your crops, well, you can't even kill the rabbit and try to save your farm from crop-destroying animals. So The whole thing sounds crazy. You understand it perfectly. So between high taxes and just generally unfair rules and high burdens, the third estate has a lot to complain about in this system. Now, many people in the third estate, especially the educated class who had read the writings of the philosophers, right? Remember Locke, Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire? They demanded a more fair share. They saw what was going around, and they didn't think it was fair. Here we can see a political cartoon that shows a nobleman, the first estate, dressed up real nice with a fancy hat. Another guy dressed like a priest. And we see a common person. And they're all being crushed by a stone. They're crushing this guy with a stone. So here you have the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. And the third estate is being crushed. And that's how a lot of people started to feel by 1789. There's other causes, because the system that gets overthrown, it's over a century old. Make no mistake, there's other causes that trigger things in 1789, and we'll get to them. But the whole system is pretty rotten. We conclude with this. It's a political cartoon, and it's one of the most famous political cartoons of the French Revolution. It's called The Third Estate Awakens. And this 1789 French political cartoon symbolizes the sudden awakening of the political consciousness on the part of the commoners, or the Third Estate. All right, so here we can see a figure representing the Third Estate. All right, he's dressed in relatively common clothing, and we see him waking up, breaking his chains, and reaching for a weapon. As an aristocrat and a clergyman flee in fear. So this represents the Third Estate, this represents the Second Estate, the nobles, and this represents the First Estate, the priest and the clergy. And he says, it's about time I woke up, because the weight of my chains was giving me a bad nightmare. And that's it for our notes, folks. So what you're going to do next is you're going to, if you want to go back and review, the notes are posted along with this video. And the next thing to do, there is a short reading. And the reading is actually pulled from the textbook. I isolated the text that I really wanted you to read. And then there's 4 questions to look at. So I want you to do the reading and answer the 4 questions in classroom. Hope everybody is safe, and I hope everybody's having a good day.